I like to begin every class period with mindful practice. So I'd like to talk about what that is and why I choose to do it in my class. So when we think of the words mindfulness, we see this word come up fairly often, and it's often connected to meditation, and meditation can often be connected to some, let's say, religious mysticism, and that's really not at all what I'm interested in. I like to even call it mindful practice because we're not seeking anything, we're just practicing being mindful. When I talk about mindfulness, what I'm trying to teach my students is for them to have the ability to be aware of their mental state, to be aware of the thoughts that are rolling around and around and around in their heads, to be aware of the emotions that they're feeling, and to have a better understanding of how our thoughts and the narratives that we get caught in our heads can affect our emotional state. And so when I do mindful practice in my class, what I'm trying to do with my students is to teach them to simply be aware of the very thoughts that are careening through their heads. If I can help my students better understand themselves and their thoughts, then they can have better control over themselves and their thoughts. If we think about how often we are lost in thought, sometimes it might be for minutes or hours before we even realize, oh, I was caught up in thoughts again. And all that time that we've spent running through those thoughts in our heads over and over again can often be a little bit destructive. If we think about the things that we say to ourselves, the little internal monologue that we have about ourselves, that commentary about the world that we live in, and things that happen to us, unfortunately, are often quite negative. Something that I say to my students often is, the things that you say to yourself in your head, would you say those out loud to a friend? And I think often that's not something that we'd say to a friend, because the things that we tell ourselves are often very, very critical and very negative. And when you are caught in that negative feedback loop of thoughts, then that can be very distracting and destructive for your emotional state. So, when I teach mindful practice, it's a set of breathing and attention exercises. And what I'm trying to teach my students is simply to be aware of the thoughts in their heads. Because as soon as a person is able to better recognize that they're lost in thoughts, then that person is also better equipped to understand where those thoughts are coming from, to better understand how they're feeling, and of course then let those thoughts go. So if I am successful in helping my students understand their thoughts and recognize their thoughts, to recognize when something has changed, to recognize when they're distracted, then that can be very helpful for their emotional well-being, but also it can help them make better decisions. Instead of being impulsive, instead of being reactionary, they can simply take a breath, return to the present moment, understand where they are, and perhaps make a better decision rather than an emotional decision. So mindful practice is this. Every class period at the very beginning when we come in, we're going to sit and take a moment to find our breath and pay attention to the things around us. And through practicing being mindful of the present moment, we are also practicing being mindful of the very thoughts that pop up in our heads. And thoughts are perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with having thoughts. The problem is when we allow thoughts to dictate our emotions, and we allow thoughts to occupy our mind space where we are completely distracted and disconnected from the world around us because we are too busy caught in a memory or caught in anticipation of something that may or may not even happen. And if I can help my students recognize those thoughts and simply stop and go, oh, I'm having that thought again. And take a breath. And realize that they're in a safe place and everything is okay in the here and now. And not get too caught up in those thoughts. That recognition, that's being mindful. Being mindful of what is happening here and now. And if I can help my students recognize what is happening here and now, instead of being caught in the past or being pulled into the future, man, that's a superpower. And I hope that I can help my students recognize that.